Is a plant-based whole food diet the healthiest diet? Is dairy dangerous? Is meat really bad for your health? Hello everyone, Alexander here, registered dietitian. Today I'm watching the first vegan documentary I ever saw. It's called Forks Over Knives and actually turned me into a vegan a very long time ago. I'm watching it now again, 12, 13 years later. Let's see what I think about it now. I think this documentary have affected a lot of people to turn more into veganism. We've had newer pro-vegan documentaries in the last couple of years, but this was one of the first big ones. Let's watch it.
So the Norwegians were forced to eat mainly plant-based foods.
In come the Germans. Immediately, 1940, wow, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Have we ever seen a population have their cardiovascular disease plummet like this? Back comes the meat, back comes the dairy, back comes the strokes and heart attacks.
Maybe war is good for health. No, maybe not. They had a bigger restriction, so they had to cut down on a lot of foods, probably lost weight, probably cut down on a lot of unhealthy stuff. It's hard to say that it was the animal products per se. Any population that goes from excess to minimal amounts of foods are probably going to lose weight and improve their health. I think we all agree that we don't want to be restricted to 3 types of foods.
That many of our most crippling conditions could be greatly reduced simply by eating what they call a whole foods, plant-based diet. This means consuming foods that come mainly from whole, minimally refined plants. It also means avoiding animal-based foods as well as processed foods like bleached flour, refined sugars, and oil.
Of course, if you go from eating more processed food to more unprocessed food in general, that leads to better health. It leads to more filling food, more nutritious foods, you lose weight, most of your health markers improve. Does it really need to be fully plant-based though, to be optimal? I don't really think so. I think a plant-based whole food diet is great for health. My criticism though is that it has to be fully plant-based. For example, the Mediterranean diet. That one allows animal protein. It allows eggs, it allows chicken, it allows fish. And you see those people that follow that type of diet pattern are in general really healthy. What they do wrong here is they portray all animal proteins as bad. All animal foods are bad for your health.
Campbell fed half the rats in his study a diet of 20% casein, the main protein and dairy products. The other half was fed only 5% casein. The rats eating the higher protein diet had a greatly enhanced level of early liver cancer tumor growth. All of the rats eating only 5% protein had no evidence of cancer whatsoever.
We could turn on and turn off cancer growth.
I mean, this rat study is interesting, but it's not on humans, but still, that could be a hypothesis, right? Like maybe there is something here. Maybe actually animal protein does increase cancer somehow. So I went through this study and actually the low protein rats died earlier. They didn't die from liver cancer, they died from other causes, but they died earlier. And the high protein rats actually survived for longer. From this study, you could actually argue that high animal protein is actually better. You survive for longer. I don't think you should make that conclusion. I don't think anyone should make any conclusion from this one study. So if we really want to know, does animal protein cause cancer? We should research it on humans, right? We've done this, and sure, processed red meat, there is some evidence that it causes certain types of cancer, specifically colon cancer. The evidence for intake of fish, it seems to be positive for health. The evidence on chicken, it seems to be positive to neutral, I would say. Red meat, sure, then that's more negative in terms of health outcomes. What's most clear, I would say, is processed red meats. Dairy is very neutral. There is some evidence in dairy and prostate cancer that it increases that risk, and I would take that seriously for sure. There's also some evidence that it reduces risks of other cancers, like colon cancer, for example. Also, the evidence on eggs is pretty neutral. If you say that all animal products or all animal protein cause cancer, you're objectively wrong. I mean, the science does not support it. I think you could be perfectly healthy without eating any animal proteins at all. But we should not lie about the evidence on fish, on chicken, on eggs, certain type of dairy, even fermented dairy seems to be protective. My recommendation, if you really want to eat animal products, would be to try to stick to fish, chicken, eggs, low-fat dairy. Also avoid dairy with added sugars. If you stick to these principles, I think you could eat animal products once in a while and be perfectly fine.
Eating whole foods, it's virtually impossible to be protein deficient without being calorie deficient because Even if you take the foods that have the least amount of protein in it, let's say potatoes, for example, or rice, 8, 9%. Wasn't that's the figure we more or less need.
So I have to talk about the potatoes. I love potatoes. I think they're massively underrated. Here it says the protein for potatoes is fine. And sure, there is some protein in potatoes, actually around 2 grams per 100 grams of potatoes. But let's say that I want to follow the recommendation for intake of protein. 0.8 grams per kilogram of weight is the minimum recommendation for protein intake per day. For me, that would mean around 66 grams of protein per day. So that would mean that I would have to eat 3.5 kilos of potatoes. And that's a lot of potatoes that I have to eat. Sure, it's possible, but depending on the foods you choose, it could be quite hard. Of course, you could just choose other options that are vegan, that are higher in protein, but there are a lot fewer options if you exclude all animal proteins.
Dr. Campbell and his colleagues finally published their China study. It identified no less than 94,000 correlations between diet and disease.
The plant food-based diet, mainly cereal grains, vegetables, and the fruits, and a very little animal food, is always associated with lower mortality.
The China study definitely supports the idea that more plant-based food in your diet is good in general for health. The problem again comes up when they say that all animal proteins are not good for health. Why do we see then that people that eat a lot of fish or chicken or eggs are in better health in general? How is that possible? Maybe we shouldn't put all animal foods in one basket. They're not all the same. This China study and the experiment they're doing in the documentary as well with these people, what it shows is that sure, if you eat more unprocessed foods, if you eat healthier foods, you care about what you buy, you start cooking your own meals, of course you become healthier. I agree with most stuff they're saying, but then all of a sudden they're like, oh, the problem is animal foods. And it's like, okay, that's a little bit too simplified. Kind of like how they in the low carb documentary simplified it a little bit too much when you only blame carbohydrates. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Anthony and the other male patients also noted another change.
You see a female and so on, it gets kind of excited. Raise the flag, I call it. This happened to us. The flag still rises.
What is it with every food documentary and erections and sex drive? They just have to include it.
Despite the apparent success of the dietary approach, some critics say eating this way is extreme.
Is a whole food plant-based diet extreme? I would say that actually it is, because you're cutting out a majority of all the foods in the supermarket basically. Now in today's society, that's kind of what you have to do if you want to keep a lower weight without taking newer medications, for example, that reduces appetite. The truth is, in today's society, the norm is eating unhealthy. The majority of us are eating unhealthy. You really have to go this extreme? I don't really think so. There are studies that look at like what type of foods we get a majority of calories from, and yeah, it's not looking great. A lot of foods that we eat nowadays would be what most people would be considered unhealthy.
I think a lot of people, stereotypically speaking, think someone that's a vegan is like some skinny hippie type of person. And I'm not necessarily trying to break the stereotype. I tried the diet for my own personal reasons, and it worked for me.
I think there is a notion out there that vegans are weaker in general and that you have to eat animal-based protein to be strong, and that's like they say here, it's definitely not true. I mean, if you train consistently, you eat a little bit more protein, that could be from plant-based sources, of course, it's perfectly fine. You don't need to eat foods from animal to be a man. That notion is kind of stupid, and it's definitely out there.
Financial conflict of interest is only one conflict of interest. There are people who've spent their entire careers trying to prove that a vegetarian diet is good for you or that red meat is bad for you. Now, they may not have industry ties, but they too have a conflict of interest.
We do develop biases personally. I had those biases too.
Isn't it very interesting that people promoting keto always come to the conclusion that meat is good for you, and people that are promoting veganism always come to the conclusion that meat is bad for you? One side could still be wrong or right, of course, but talking about biases, if you really don't want any bias, of course it's almost impossible, but you should definitely not be like team keto, team vegan, or try to be of any team. Try to just be team whatever the science show, because that's probably what's right.
Real men eat plants. Real
I eat
men
plants.
Eat plants.
Every day, plants.
I think the closer we get to a plant-based diet, I should say a whole foods plant-based diet, the healthier we're going to be for all of us.
Everybody should increase their intake of plant foods. More vegetables, more fruits and berries, more beans. I mean, it would be good for everyone's health. But I find it kind of random that we also have to exclude all animal products entirely, even the ones that show positive effects on health. I guess that's where I'm disagreeing with this documentary. The greatest reason to become a vegan, I would say, is the ethical aspect. I think also in terms of environmental impact. Today there's so much processed vegan foods as well, so it's very easy to eat very unhealthy while being vegan. For health, I think the argument is a little bit weaker. That was Forks Over Knives.